Hi, and welcome to another episode of Starship Gaming. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we make more awesome videos. Now let's jump right into today's topic. Today we are going to review Ghostbusters the video game for the Sony PlayStation 2. Now, Ghostbusters the video game is really interesting because honestly, there's two versions of it. The main version, of course, being at the time of its release in 2009, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 versions, which featured realistic characters, while the PlayStation 2, Nintendo Wii, Nintendo DS, and PlayStation Portable versions featured a more cartoony look. Now, if you were a Ghostbusters fan and you did not own, at the time of its release, a PlayStation 3 or an Xbox 360, and instead you had to settle for the more cartoony looking version, then you may have been a little upset. Of course, another thing that's a major difference between the two versions is the rating. The more cartoony version was rated E10+, and lacked language. Yes, there was no cursing in these particular versions, while it was present in the T for Teen rated version for PS3 and Xbox 360. Of course, if that's a concern, whether you're concerned if your game should have cursing or not, then you shouldn't let that be what you base your whole opinion on a game, based on that. But yeah, they basically decided with the Sony PlayStation 2 version and the other similar versions to give it a more cartoony and more kid-friendly or family-friendly aspect to the game. The game follows a very similar part to its more advanced PS3 and Xbox 360 counterparts, with very few minor differences. Of course, there is a difference in level layout and all that jazz. Of course, like I tell people, if you want to find out what all that jazz is, I really recommend that you actually play the game yourself and give it a try. I urge people to try out any of the video games that I recommend so they can form their own opinion on it. Now, in the past, of course, I have played the PS3 version of the game, which at the time was considered the best quality version. Of course, now you have a remastered version that was released in 2019. Yeah, it's basically the same game, just more high definition and better quality than the original 2009 releases of the game. Of course, the cartoony version was not remastered, so yeah. A little bit of a backstory about the game itself. It was originally intended to be a third film at some point, apparently, which I always thought that's interesting. Of course, it is, well, as of right now, until we get the next Ghostbusters film, it is considered canon or loose canon. Loose canon. But yes, that is the term, loose canon. It is considered somewhat canon as of right now. Of course, the 2016 Ghostbusters, in which everybody hates, is no longer canon. It exists in its own universe. So, it did not affect the game universe in any way. But it makes you wonder, when they remastered the game in 2019, whether they intended for it to remain in canon or not. Because, let's face it, why would they go through the trouble to remaster a 10-year-old game and re-release it if they didn't intend for it to be in the canon in some way? Of course, it was a really popular game. You could say that's the reason, but I'd like to believe that it will somewhere, though loosely, remain in the canon upon the release of the third Ghostbusters film, which I really hope so, because the game was great. Or I should say, the story in the game was great. As for the PS2 version, if you don't mind the cartoony aesthetic to it, then you will enjoy this game. If I had to give it a rating on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best, I'd have to give it at least a 3. It's nowhere near a masterpiece compared to its more lifelike PS3, PS4, and eventual PS4, what did I say? PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, yeah, you get the gist of it. Nintendo Switch, it's been re-released. If you enjoy the cartoony look to it, then bully for you. Personally, I wasn't a big fan of the cartoony look. I guess it has a lot to do with what they were going for, their target audience for the time. Because look at it this way. In 2009, most of the gamers that were around had moved on to PS3 and Xbox 360 at that point. And the only ones who still really bought the systems that the games were originally released for, I should say the cartoony versions, PS2, which was mostly relegated to being a low-end console, fairly cheap, was mostly bought for children circa 2008 and later, because most gamers at that point, like I said, they've already had or were planning to buy a PS3 or Xbox 360. And then you had the Wii, which of course is pretty much a family console. And then of course you had the PSP and the Nintendo DS. Not saying that the PSP was a kid's console, but there was at last a lot of kid-friendly games. PSP by 2009 was more or less moving towards the end-of-life phase. Of course, the eventual release of the PlayStation Vita was very soon after that, just a few years after that release. But as the company saw it, they basically saw handhelds as more or less a thing for children. Of course, not saying that the PSP was for children, but they basically figured, a lot of people are going to be buying their children handhelds, hence a PSP and a Nintendo DS version, and we got to make it cartoony and family friendly. The PSP, PlayStation 2, of course the PlayStation 2 version we're talking about, the Nintendo Wii, and the Nintendo DS versions, of course, were made by a different developer than the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions, hence the different quality. But based on my rating, 3 out of 5, this is one I recommend playing it, but only if you like Ghostbusters. If you're not a Ghostbusters fan, I really don't recommend playing this. But if you enjoy Ghostbusters or you enjoy family-friendly games, this would be a decent one to spend an afternoon playing. Of course, one more thing I have to note. I do like that the original cast did come back to voice their characters. It just wouldn't be a Ghostbusters game without them. So that's another plus. And like I said, if you like Ghostbusters, then you may enjoy the PS2 version. Of course, if you are a hardcore Ghostbusters fan, I don't recommend this version of the game. I do recommend you playing either the Xbox 360 or the PS3 version, or if you have a PS4 or Xbox One or Nintendo Switch, then I recommend getting the remastered version. So, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we make more awesome videos. And until next time, I will see ya.